So we've got here 4 of the most capable touring four-wheel drive wagons on the Australian market, and we're going to find out which is the best off-road. So what is best off-road? Well, to fully answer that question, you're going to need about 5 types of sand, 5 types of rock, and all sorts of other terrains. But today we've probably got the best substitute for all of those, which is rocky hills, which will really test the vehicle's ability to put power to the ground and their traction. Now, this test is just purely focused on off-road capability. We're not going to look at value for money, payload, weights, or anything else like that. Just off-road capability today. So let's introduce the vehicles. We're going to start with the Nissan Y62 Patrol, which is the largest vehicle here. It has independent suspension front and rear, which gives it great ground clearance, along with tyre diameter, which is fairly tall, and the owner's gone a little bit taller as well, so we're going to take that into account. The brake traction control is pretty good. It does continue to work with the rear cross-axle locker, which is standard on the vehicles, and of course it's got low range, as every vehicle does here, and it is an automatic. So if we move across to the Land Rover Defender, the JLR Defender, so you can't see the badge, right? We'll just call it Defender. So we're looking at the Defender here, and this vehicle has fully independent suspension, but also air suspension, so we can actually raise the vehicle's height and lower the vehicle's height as well. And its ground clearance is pretty much on a par with the Y62, as it also has independent suspension. So absolutely great ground clearance on both of those vehicles. It's got a cross-axle differential lock, but it's computer controlled, so you cannot actually override it. It comes in when the computers think is appropriate and unlocks when the computers think it's no longer needed, whereas in the Y62 it's manually controlled. It's also automatic. The engine power, etc., in low range doesn't really matter. There's plenty of it. And it's got hill descent control, as does the Y62. Now we come across to the Land Rover Grenadier, sorry, the INEOS Grenadier, and this is the newest vehicle here, but it's actually the oldest technology. It's got live axles front and rear, but pretty good ground clearance even for live axle vehicle, and it's got optional twin axle differential locks, front and rear cross-axle lockers, which are on this vehicle as it is a Trial Master specification. The brake traction control is fairly good. It does have hill descent control as well. And finally, over here on the Toyota 300 series, this vehicle is the GR Sport, which is the off-road version. It actually has a cross-axle locking differentials front and rear, which you don't get on any other model. It also has the EKDSS sway bar disconnect system for extra flex, and Toyota's brake traction control system is really, really good. It's got the least ground clearance here compared to the other vehicles, so that might hamper it. We'll see how we go. Okay guys, so we've got 4 vehicles here. You're going to be driving your own vehicles, and the test we're going to set up is pretty simple. We're going to go up various different rocky and rutted inclines, and I'm going to get you guys to drive the hard line as slow as possible. If you come to a halt, then just back out of it and try a little bit more momentum, but it's all about how slow the car can do it, and I'm going to get you to take the hardest lines, no cheating with all of your off-road driving skills, etc. We want to test the cars here, not the drivers. You're all exceptionally capable drivers, probably only second to your good looks, and it's all about the cars today, not about you guys. Does that make sense? Yep. Great. All right, now here's the question for you, Stephen. Which car do you think is going to come out on top after we've done all of this?
It has to be the Toyota.
Why? Why does it have to be the Toyota?
Because it's a Toyota.
Is that it? Okay, this is typical Toyota justification. Why is it best? Because it's a Toyota. Can you do any better?
The heritage of it and the amount of time off-road.
Okay, so because it's been around a long time, it's good. Not really a convincing argument. Okay, who do you think is going to win, Marcel?
Well, listening to this, it must be the Toyota.
So you think the Toyota's going to win?
Well, he's so confident, it must be true.
Okay, this is not going how I thought it would go, but all right. All right. So, Colin, you've brought the Defender. Who do you think is going to win?
I reckon it's going to be line ball if I had to pick one, I will go with the Defender.
Yeah.
I've had it for a couple of years now, and it keeps its feet on the ground really well, and I reckon that'll make the difference.
Okay, so we've got 2 votes for Toyota, 1 vote for Defender. Ross?
Oh, have to be the Nissan, have to be the Patrol. We have to pick a different car. So
Well, no, you don't. You can vote Toyota for no reason whatsoever, just as Stephen's done. Yeah.
I think it'll be very evenly matched.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I think we'll be surprised that you can pick a difference. Each has its pros and cons, and I think in this sort of bracket, I think they'll be all evenly matched.
Okay.
Oh, very politically correct.
Very politically correct. Yeah, very diplomatic. Yeah. Clearly not a Toyota driver. All right, so I'm going to go for my prediction, and I am going to pick the Defender as going to be the best. And on this basis, it's got the best ground clearance, and we will be testing ground clearance. I think that the 300 is just going to drag its rear diff and just not go any further at some point today. It's got the best brake traction control, and it's got a rear locker. So I reckon the L663 is going to come out on top, closely followed by the Y62 Grenadier, and I think that but just because it's sort of Toyota, right? Just because it's a Toyota. But that said, all of these cars are absolutely brilliant off-road. There's going to be no loser today at all. You could take any of them, drive them anywhere in Australia, apart from the really hard tracks, and you can just winch a bit. So they're all superb off-road vehicles, and it's a question of great versus amazingly great. That's really what we're here to find out today. So to understand what's going on in this test, we need to talk about vehicle suspension types, and there's 2 we're going to cover. The first is independent suspension, and what that means is that when one wheel moves up, it has no effect on the other one. So I move this wheel, as you can see, and there's absolutely no effect on the opposite wheel. Now we call that independent front suspension at the front of the vehicle, and at the back we call that independent rear suspension, or IFS at the front, and when it's independent at the back and the front, we call that a fully independent system. Now that is in contrast to a live axle, which is here. Now this is actually a portal axle. The hub is dropped down a bit, but it's still a live axle. There's this beam axle here, otherwise known as a solid axle. Now the way that works is different. When this wheel is moved up, you can see that the other wheel is forced down like so, and of course it can move completely at the same time up and down. So that's your live axle, and that's the independent. Now they work differently off-road as well. If I put this on a flex ramp, you can see that this wheel moves up, but there's nothing forcing this one down, and that's important. Whereas with the live axle, when I put it on that ramp, this wheel comes up, that wheel gets forced down. So we're getting positive pressure forcing this wheel down, and the more pressure or load on a wheel, the greater the traction. So this wheel is less likely to spin as it flexes down than this wheel, which has minimal to no pressure on it. I can actually force the vehicle down like so. So the advantages are, with the live axle, you tend to get better suspension flex up and down like that, but also you get this positive forcing down, and also the live axle is more robust. The independent suspension is lighter and better for on-road handling, and it also has a ground clearance advantage as well. These 2 arms here and here tend to form a bit of a V like that, and therefore you get better ground clearance. However, when the suspension is compressed like so, that ground clearance advantage tends to disappear, as might be the case if the vehicle was coming down the hill. The front would compress, and then your suspension would your extra ground clearance would start to disappear. Now in contrast, the live axle system has a fixed amount of clearance underneath the live axle, and even when I compress it, that clearance does not change at all. And coming down a hill, yes, the whole front of the vehicle would compress a bit, but the clearance underneath the axle would not change. So neither is better than the other off-road. They've both got pros and cons, as you're going to see in the test. Now, let's also talk about the three specific vehicles we've got, which are trick suspension systems. And I'm going to start off with the LC300. Now, when a vehicle goes around a corner, there's an amount of body roll, which I'm sure you've all seen. Now, there is a way to fix that, and that's something called an anti-roll bar or a sway bar, which I have simulated here using two Allen keys taped together. Now, in effect, that's fixed to the chassis, and when the vehicle goes around the corner, it has to try and twist that anti-sway bar like so, and that prevents the body roll, and it reduces the body roll. Now, reducing body roll around corner is a good thing, because the more a body rolls, then the less grip you have. You get a load increase going onto the outside, but that increase in load and therefore grip is less than the inside, so you get a net reduction of grip when you go around a corner. Therefore, you want to minimize that body roll, and you put a sway bar in, which forces the body to twist that sway bar and reduce the roll. And that's great for high speed, but for off-road it's no good, because sway bars have two negative consequences. One is they stop the suspension flexing as freely as it perhaps could do, and you want a very flexible suspension off-road, even if it doesn't go to the full travel, because the more the less flexible it is, the more it bounces. The more it bounces, the less traction you have. And secondly, it can actually limit the full sort of suspension flex, which again is bad. So what you ideally want to do is have a sway bar which works at high speed on road, and then get rid of it for off-road. And that's exactly what Toyota's EKD Assess system actually does. It's all computer controlled. It disconnects the front and rear sway bars as required for on and off-road. Then we come to the Land Rover system, and the Land Rover system is a little bit similar. Now, on this vehicle we've got springs, which are these metal coils here, and there's the springs working. Because it's an independent suspension, again, when that goes up, there's nothing forcing it down. Now, in the case of the Land Rovers, we've got air springs instead of these coil springs. Now, it's an interlink system, so when this wheel is forced up, air comes out from this air spring here and is forced into that system, and then it in effect mimics the live axle system of that wheel being moved up and then this one being forced down. And that's the way the crosslink system works. So air comes out of this air spring and is forced into that one, forcing that down. You would get more load on that wheel, therefore more traction. That's the way that works. Now, Nissan have got a similar system, except their crosslink works front to rear. So when this wheel is forced up, it forces that one down, and it doesn't work off air springs either. It's hydraulics. And same for the back. This wheel is forced up and it forces that one down, and then that helps keep all four wheels in contact with the ground, because you don't want the vehicle rocking around. You want as far as you can, equal load and weight on all four wheels, and that's best for stability and therefore grip. So the first obstacle is a rutted, muddy hill climb, which all vehicles can ascend, only just, but it will require them to either have really good brake traction control or keep all four wheels in contact with the ground. Now you can see here the Grenadier has run out of flex, and the traction control, brake traction control, is going to have to try and pull it out of that, and it does after a few more revs. You can see how slippery that is there. Same thing again, it's run out of axle flex, requires more work with the throttle to wake that brake traction control up, and then it can continue to drive up and over. You can see diagonal wheels spinning there. Really needs quite a lot of extra power to get that traction control working. Now here's the same climb again, but from the side you can see as soon as the wheels go offloaded and they just spin, and it's not really getting the torque to that left wheel, the left front wheel and right rear. And again there, as soon as the vehicle runs out of flex, it tends to come to a stop. So Grenadier again with the front and rear cross axle lockers engaged. This time it's so much easier because it's not relying on its brake traction control, still that same slip as before. You can see how slippery it is, but this time torque is able to get to the wheel that needs it, and the car comes up without too much drama. And here's the side view. Take a look at that front left wheel, and it's not actually spinning at all. Rear left not spinning at all either. That's the magic of the cross axle lockers there. Now of course they do work very well, but try and turn like that and you're going to have a problem.
Nice and slow.
Now we're going to look at the Defender with its fully independent suspension. You can see there that it's lifting a wheel much higher than the Grenadier did, but it's actually managing to keep forward momentum much better. Now remember, this vehicle has an automatic rear cross axle locker, but look at the front axle work. It's got far better brake traction control and is able to complete that easier. And again, look at that front left wheel barely moves. The rear wheel, little bit of spin there, maybe that locker didn't quite come in, but a far more effective climb, even if it doesn't keep the wheels anywhere near as close to the ground as the Grenadier. Now we've got the Y62, which is also fully independent suspension, but seems to have better flex than the Land Rover. This owner is giving it a little bit more revs to wake up that traction control, and you can see there that again the wheel lifts a bit more, but the traction control works, and probably because he's revved it a bit more. And on the side here, we can actually see there, the car's come to a halt, but even so, the brake traction control is pretty effective in just grabbing that wheel, sending torque to the opposite and letting the car ascend. So Y62 again, we've engaged the rear locker this time. Brake traction control is active on the front axle. I've got another video about that. Sometimes it's better to take the rear locker out and just have good traction control on all four axles, because it does seem to be a bit deactivated on the front axle compared to when the rear locker isn't in. You can see there that front right wheel needs to do more work, and the owner eventually gives it a bit of a rev, and that activates the traction control enough. That front right wheel starts to work, and then the vehicle is able to come up. Only just. And here's the side. Take a look at that back axle now. It's really not spinning at all relative to the other side, but there's a tiny bit of wheel spin because it is quite slippery and muddy. You can also see it's slightly running out of departure angle there as well, despite the fact we took the tow bar out. Finally, we've got the 300 series GR Sport, which actually has pretty impressive axle flex, and then that's due partially to the EKD assessed sway bar disconnect system, but also really good brake traction control. You can see that it's not really hesitating as it comes up here. And look at that. Wheels are pretty much on the ground, so almost it is better than the Grenadier in some respects. Now look at that front left wheel. Say just one or two tiny sort of spins, and then it grips and goes. Same for the rear wheel there, that traction control working nice and early for it, and the suspension is flexing beautifully as well. Now here's the 300 series with the front and rear cross axle lockers engaged, and you can see that there's even less hesitation this time, because those wheels don't even have to spin, just comes absolutely straight up, and that's probably the easiest run out of the lot, I reckon. And now here it is from the side. Look, there's just really no wheel spin, where every other car, including its previous run, had some form of wheel spin, maybe just a little bit there. So let's take a look at wheelbase, which is the distance between the centre of the front wheel and the centre of the rear wheel. On the 300 series, that's 2850 millimetres. On the Grenadier, it's 2922. The Defender 3022, and Y62, the longest of all, 230 millimetres longer than the 300 series. Now, if we put a line through the centre of the front wheels there, then that gives you an indication as to how much extra distance there is. Now, why is that important? Well, a long wheelbase is not necessarily better off-road than a short wheelbase. It really depends on the situation. But in this particular test, imagine that the 300 series had its wheels sunk into two ruts like that. With those exact same two ruts, the Y62 would have its rear wheel actually slightly out of it, and that would have an advantage going over those two ruts. Now, if the situation was reversed, the 300 series would have an advantage. But in this particular test, a longer wheelbase is an advantage. In later tests, you'll see it's a disadvantage. Now we're going to take a side look at these vehicles and see where they come to a stop, i.e. that front left wheel starts to spin. So in all cases, the front left wheel has started to spin, so the suspension is out of flex, and as expected, the Defender has done the worst, and I think the LC300 just edges the Grenadier for complete flex. But that's not the whole story, because it's also about clearance as well. Now, you can see the Defender's got a bit of clearance underneath its sills, whereas the Y62 and the 302s are pretty much touching their side steps, although you'd reduce them. I think that in some ways the winner here is the Grenadier, because it's got great flex and it's actually still got a fair bit of clearance, because you'd also remove those side steps and run rock sliders for serious off-roading. Now this really shows us the differences in brake traction control. Remember, the Defender has its rear locker coming in as and when the computer decides it should, so that does aid it. So here's the four again, and we're going to stop them at the point at which they reach maximum flex on this hill. Again, the Defender's massively lifting its wheel, which not only means there's only really two wheels driving the vehicle forwards, but it also destabilises the vehicle with pitching and rolling. The Y62 does a better job, but not quite as good as the Grenadier. And overall, again, it seems the LC300, with its live rear axle and independent front and disconnectable sway bars, has done the best job keeping all four wheels on the ground. Now we'll restart the video and let them climb out of that situation. Now, if you're interested in suspension, take a look at this video where I've got two otherwise identical Suzuki Jimny radio controlled models that I've modified one to have a less flexible suspension, and it's not always outperformed by the original. This test also highlighted something called a departure angle, and there's three angles to look at on a four-wheel drive. You've got the approach angle, the ramp or the breakover angle, and the one we're interested in today, which is the departure angle, and that's 25 degrees on the LC300. On the Grenadier, it's pretty impressive, 36 degrees. The Defender's a little better once its air suspension is raised, 40 degrees, and the Patrol relatively poor like the 300 at 26 degrees. Now take a look and see which of these four cars drags its back, and you can see fairly clearly it's the Y62 and LC300 that have the worst departure angle and are pretty much dragging their backs, whereas the Defender and the Grenadier don't. And the Defender's got an advantage because it doesn't have much flex, therefore it doesn't let its chassis get too close to the ground. Grenadier does well by having flex and having a great departure angle. As soon as your back starts to drag, then you tend to be going nowhere, so it's important to preserve clearance. Right, so what we learned first, the tyres in this test made no difference, and of course, tyres one of the main things you change off-road, but you can see that when the vehicles are twin-locked, they drove up without a problem. Therefore, it wasn't grip which was the issue, it was getting the wheel with grip to turn. That was the issue for the vehicles which were driven up without the cross-axle lockers engaged. Now, the Defender has the least flex, we kind of knew that, but wasn't really disadvantaged because its brake traction control was just so good, and it obviously has that rear semi-locker as well. The Grenadier brake traction control was absolutely subpar in this company. It's actually okay, but you know, this is the best of the best. The Toyota brake traction control system is amazing. I mean, the way the LC300 went up, it was almost like it was locked. And the EKDSS system is amazing for suspension flex, considering it's got an independent front end. The flex on the 300 series was very, very impressive. And the Grenadier clearances and angles, that's going to come out later, that was impressive, and it had good flex on the front end as well, and I think it had the best overall clearance. And cross-axle lockers in this case were more effective than brake traction control, but that's not always going to be the case. And I think that the Patrol demonstrated that brake traction control and a rear locker is a good thing. So did the Defender, but because that's got an automatic cross-axle rear diff, it's less apparent. So there will be further tests coming up. I hope you found this video useful. If you've got any questions, please drop them in the comments, and thank you for watching.